This is Geek Gab with your host, John, and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Saturday, February 10th, 2018. It is episode 130, episode 130. We are going to be talking today, and this is not necessarily the order in which we will be talking about these things, but we will most assuredly be talking about at least these things and perhaps much, much more besides. We are going to be talking about Gloomhaven. We are going to be talking about the movie, The 1517 to Paris, and we're going to be talking about Winchester, which is also a brand new movie. Both of those hit cinema this week, and I, your host, bravely and boldly went to see those movies so that I could come to you and tell you exactly how awesome they are, whether that's a teeny little bit awesome or whether that's a lot of bit awesome. I have brought that knowledge with me that I may pass it along to you and you may be edified thereby. But before we dive into that, let's introduce my co-host who has been with me since the beginning and actually a decade and a bit before the beginning of this show. Dornall, a.k.a. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, if a bit tired. How about you?
I think it would be amusing for you to tell the audience why you are physically exhausted today.
Oh, that would amuse me, not you. I skipped all the gaming and reading and working. Sorry, Jeffro, I still haven't finished Appendix N because I was out dancing last night. But rest assured, guys, I did the dancing as geeky as I could manage. It was just some East Coast swing.
He was dancing the night away with a bevy of beautiful women. So I want you to allow that to sink in, folks. Exactly how much he is putting into enjoying his life and also getting some great exercise.
Yeah, I know it's not the geekiest thing. I'm gonna have to make up for that with a bunch of board games this afternoon. But it was fun. I had a great time.
I got to tell you, this is kind of small and silly, but I thought it was hilarious. When I went to the movies, there is, of course, before the movies, all the commercials. And it's not just, coming attractions anymore. It's not just trailers and previews. No. Now they're having commercials for real businesses. And one of them that's been running for, I don't know how long, it's been over a decade, is for this company. It's the local gas company here in my neck of the woods. And they have recently changed their name. Now, their name used to be Questar Gas. And I always thought that was funny because in my mind, the name Questar sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon hero, like from the early 80s, right? You have He-Man, you have Thundar, you have Questar, you have the Transformers, Optimus Prime. Fits right in. And so heroic, pulpy, wears a spacesuit, carries a laser gun, shoots aliens. Questar. That's what I thought of when I heard that name.
I can see that.
They changed the name of their company from Questar Gas to Dominion Energy. Dominion Energy. They sound like a villain, like a villainous mega corporation from a cyberpunk novel.
That's exactly what I was thinking. They've really embraced our dark cyberpunk future.
If I wrote a cyberpunk novel and I put in it a company named Dominion Energy, all the readers and critics would complain that that was too on the nose, that was too obvious, that they would say that was going too far. It's like naming your bad guy villain antagonist or villain antagonist for that authentic European flair. Not that people haven't done that. As the Expendables shows, the Expendables 2, the main bad guy, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, was literally named Villain. So,
and don't forget
Dominion Energy, Nate.
Don't forget the most famous cyberpunk novel, whose protagonist is hero protagonist.
Exactly. So, the funny thing is right before the show, someone made a comment on my Facebook page where I complained about this yesterday, and they said that, in actuality, Questar was a science fiction movie magazine, science fiction fantasy adventure magazine from the late 70s and early 80s. Questar. And I thought that cannot possibly be true. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous, the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard of. So I searched for it on Google, and it is absolutely true. It is 100% true. Questar is a science fiction magazine. They're talking about Star Trek and Alien, but also things like Kiss, the band, Moonraker with James Bond. They include fiction, interviewing Isaac Asimov, Bigfoot Lives. They interviewed Mark Hamill, yada, yada, yada. That's what the magazine is, which I thought was hilarious, that is such a stereotypical name, and yet someone ran with it. So I don't know. The benefits of an intriguing and compelling name. Now, speaking of which, you told me about the name of a game that has, in my mind at least, an intriguing and compelling name. It's called Gloomhaven.
Pretty evocative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gloomhaven's the name of a board game, and it's also the name of it's a fantasy D&D like board game, and Gloomhaven's also the name of the hometown where your heroes gather.
So not a sunny place is.
Yeah, you know what? There's always bad stuff happening in and around Gloomhaven, and you spend the game traveling around the world, having adventures and fighting the bad things. But I mentioned it because I just started playing a campaign of Gloomhaven, and this is a tactical board game that's D&D-esque adventurers versus the bad guys board game, but it's dripping with that theme, and it borrows heavily from the legacy board game systems. Daddy Warpig, are you familiar with legacy board games?
Those are the ones where events that occur during the game are marked permanently on the board. They literally change the map for all future games.
Okay, so this guy, the guy who made Gloomhaven, did that with a Dungeons and Dragons style setting. It was a Kickstarter thing. It's a massively expensive game, and it comes in this huge box. It looks like 3 other board games are stacked on each other. That's how big this box is. And it's got components and rules and cards that detail the world of Gloomhaven, and they've got a board that's a fantasy map, but the board is very generic and laid out. There are no towns or anything on the map besides Gloomhaven, and that's because every time you visit a new location on the map, it's like playing a video game. You explore a new castle on the map. You literally take a sticker that represents that castle, and you put it on that spot of the map. So as you play and explore the world, you literally put those things on the map. And that's one of the ways in which you permanently alter the game as you play it. They've got stacks of events that...
So,
go ahead.
That's kind of like a hex crawl thing.
Yeah. It's more like a video game because the locations of those places are predetermined.
Oh, okay.
but the order or whether you discover them at all depends on what you do in game. You know, if you finish one scenario, it'll scenario 1, it'll unlock scenario 2. If you finish scenario 2, it might unlock scenario 3, or if you fail scenario 2, it might unlock scenario 4. Right. It feels a little bit like a choose your own adventure.
Okay.
And speaking of which, they've got whole decks of cards of choose your own adventure cards that are things that happen as you travel or in town. And everybody playing, being the party, they have to make a decision and then flip the card over and see what the results of their decision is. Maybe you're confronting bandits or hunting down werewolves or something. And then after that event happens, it doesn't ever happen again in the game world. You are instructed to actually destroy the card, remove it from the game.
That's quite the marketing gimmick.
Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that was first popularized with Risk. They made Risk Legacy, where you would play a series of games, and the results of the game, whatever happens during the game, would affect the face of the Earth for the next game. Including, whole territories could be erased off the map if, due to nuclear war or something. And this one is not quite the same idea. It's more like you're having a campaign with a group of other players, and you sort of build this adventure world. So you're permanently altering the game, but you're doing things like exploring new parts of this world, having encounters, facing or killing other villains, that sort of thing, and that permanently affects the actual components of the game. And I feel another question coming on.
Does the game require or hinge on the same group of players every time?
Not quite. It's probably best if you do, but the rules on creating characters and playing the game from session to session work with changing groups of players. You would form a party, but if someone's not there the next time you play, that's fine. You just play with 3 players or 2 players. And if someone else jumps in and joins the party, that's okay. There's nothing against them starting a new character with one of the existing character classes. And the character classes are the most mind-blowing aspect of the game. The box has a bunch of different character classes, something like 20. Only 6 of them are available at the beginning of the game. So you've literally got boxes of figurines and rules and action cards that you can't look at because you haven't unlocked them yet. And as you play through the adventure, you may trigger events or scenarios that will trigger your character to retire. Each character is given a card with a personal quest. And if they meet that requirement, the character is forcibly retired, and most of those quests unlock a new character class. So this isn't just a game you play 4, 5, 6 sessions. You can play this game for years and unlocking all these scenarios and all these characters and everything.
So what are some of the classes? What are some examples of some of the classes?
So the game starts off with a few of your standard classes. There's the brute and the scoundrel and the sorcerer. And there's a couple, and the other 3 are a little weirder. There's a gnome-like tinker, and who uses mechanical objects, and it's got it's hard to describe. There's a rock guy, like an elemental earth character called the Cragheart, and he doesn't play like your standard D&D classes. He's more about creating obstacles and smashing obstacles to sort of, he affects the battlefield physically. And the last one is called the Mind Thief. I honestly don't know what that one does. It's a little too weird.
So have you had a chance to play this?
Yeah, I've played. I sat down with a buddy, and we did a casual scenario just to sort of try to learn the rules. And then this week we started a campaign, and we played through the first scenario legit. It's a lot of fun. It's a little complicated. There's lots of rules to follow, and since it's a cooperative game, it's one of those things where everybody sort of has to remember to do all the things in the right order, and make sure that we're all following the rules. Otherwise, it may not be a fun experience. But it's big, it's epic, and just the first couple scenarios, it was a lot of fun, and it's tactical too. It's not like your typical cooperative game where one guy's the quarterback and he just tells everybody what to do. Everybody has their own hidden agendas and hidden bonuses, and so you make your own decisions in the tactical turn-to-turn combat, and then everything else feels like this grand world-building experience. Yeah, Jackson Anderson in chat asks about the characters. You already heard some of the descriptions. You can tell the characters are a lot more like your new style superhero D&D characters rather than your generic, loser fighter with 12 strength sort of old school D&D characters.
So, how much is the box set? How much is it to get into this?
As far as I know, it is totally out of print. If you want to pick a copy up, it's going to be at least $200, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, and who knows if and when they're going to come out with another printing. I imagine they will, because the secondary market got nuts. Amazon.com lists one for under $200. That doesn't seem likely. It's probably going to be around $200 to get one.
Wow,
but check it out on boardgamegeek.com. It's really cool. This buddy of mine who I'm playing with, he said that he kickstarted it at the beginning and totally forgot about it. It was one of those things where he says that sounds cool. I'll put a little bit of money down, and he ended up getting it like a year or two later, and I think it's great.
Well, yeah. Amazon says there's 2 left in stock for $190.95.
Get it.
So,
I'm not gonna get it.
All right. Well, let us actually, since you're continuing to do that, go ahead and if anything interesting or unexpected, because you have to open up those packages, so you might get stuff that you have no idea would have existed, right?
Yeah, there are events and locations and things that you can unlock that you aren't necessarily going to unlock. You may finish the whole campaign, you may be done with the game and have 3 or 4 classes and 4 or 5 events that you never unlocked, that you never saw.
Okay, well, if you continue to play it, go ahead and fill us in, keep us up to date
absolutely.
if there's anything happens.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about the other game?
I'll also let you know if it actually gets back into print.
Did you want to talk about the other game you had mentioned before we went on the air?
Oh, it's another Kickstarter game named Scythe. I thought I'd mentioned it before, but I did get my own copy a couple of months ago. That's another. I'm going to take the rest of our time talking about that. So let's save that for another time.
Okay. I will say that I'm looking at Scythe on Amazon, and I know this artist. They say World Building and Art by Jacob Rosalski. I've been looking at his art for a couple of years now. He's got some very, very interesting World War I style mech art. And every now and then I go back to like his ArtStation or his DeviantArt or wherever he is and check to see what new stuff he's added. He's got some great, great stuff there. He also does like this old European werewolves. He's got a series of pictures like that are just really, really great. If you're looking into kind of a Victorian era, World War I era, or a little bit before then, werewolf game, you definitely check out his art because they're very evocative. They're great concept art for something like that.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I got it. I'm a sucker for tactical board games like Scythe. It's really crunchy, sort of a 4X style game. Civilization-esque, but it's the art that really drew me in. It was actually another friend of mine who said, John, we have to play this game. It's got hussars in it. And I said, what's a hussar? And she goes, no, it's the Polish cavalry. They're paladins. All right, you're going to have to explain this. And the hussars, they're called winged hussars. Polish cavalry who mounted wooden wings on their backs that stuck straight up from the back of their breastplate, so that when they rode into battle, it looked like an army of angels bearing down on you. It's a real thing, a real thing that happened in history. Absolutely wonderful and terrifying at the same time. And that's part of the artwork in Scythe. Scythe is set in sort of an alternate history Europe, just after World War One, except it had mecha in World War One. And so each player plays a representative of a vaguely European nation, and they have their own animal companion, and they can build mechs. And so you're exploring this little section of Europe where the mech factory exists, the original mech factory exists. And so you're exploring and gathering resources and building up your workers and sometimes doing a little bit of fighting. But it's the world that really drew me in, that evocative artwork from the artist. And all the art is done by the same artist. It's all done in that sort of impressionist style, and there's almost always this peaceful sort of early 20th century scene with a mecha striding through the background. It's really fantastic stuff. So as a game, I give it 2 thumbs up. It's technical, it's interesting, it's complex, and as something that you want to have in your collection. I have this game. Its cover, the top of it is facing out. I don't just shelve it like the rest of my games. It's a beautiful, beautiful game.
All right. And Scythe is a really, really evocative name too. Unlike the next movie, or the first movie I want to talk about, which is The 1517 to Paris. That's an awful title. And I'll tell you why it's an awful title. Because I saw the movie yesterday, and a minute after the movie started, I couldn't remember the name. And after the movie got out, I couldn't remember the name. And when I went to tweet about the fact that I had saw the movie and we're going to review it today, I couldn't remember the name. And I had to look it up. Every time I had to look it up. And when I, went to schedule the show this morning, I couldn't remember the name. It's an awful name. It's long, it's tongue-twistery, and it doesn't mean anything. If they had named it like 317 to Paris, that would have been better. Or just 317, whatever, something simple, something clear. I know this is a small complaint, but it's really a small complaint, but when it happens a lot in a day, in less than 24 hours, you remember it.
Yeah, I would have gone with Snakes on a Train myself.
Snakes on a Train. So here's the thing about 1517. It's directed by Clint Eastwood. And he is a phenomenal director. He's done a lot of great movies. One of my favorites, Gran Torino.
That was a really good movie.
It is a really good movie. He directed it. Very, very interesting movie. Very, very moving movie. Here's the thing. The main characters, and I guess I'll go into some background real quick. There was, at one time, on a train from Amsterdam to Paris, an Islamic terrorist pulled out an AK-47 and was about to massacre as much of the train as he could. A man grabbed the AK-47 and ran and was shot by the pistol. The terrorist shot him with the pistol. Then he picked up the AK-47. And 3 Americans, 2 soldiers and a civilian, who were all friends, who had been traveling around Europe together, who were going from Amsterdam to Paris, attacked this terrorist, beat him down, tied him up, and then one of them performed emergency first aid on the guy who had been shot, because he'd been shot in the neck in his carotid artery and was bleeding out. He saved that guy's life, stopped the massacre on the train. So this is a real event. That. Real event, really happened. So they wrote a book about it. The people involved got several medals, including the French Legion of Honor, and a couple of distinguished medals from the Army, and then the civilian got the Secretary of Defense Merit Award. So very prestigious awards. I think the Legion of Honor is the highest award France can give. So they wrote a book about the experiences of these men on their trip around Europe, and it went into their childhood, how they met and became friends. They've been friends since they were in middle school, how they met and became friends, what eventually led a couple of them into the military, so on and so forth. And then Clint Eastwood got the script and started to make the movie. And here's the thing. The three men play themselves in the movie.
Huh.
So the movie is a great movie because it's directed by Clint Eastwood. It's well shot. All of the supporting actors turn in great performances. It's compelling and moving, and even if you know about the events that happened, it's tense, and the entire movie is building up towards this attack. And we start off with a clip of leading up to this attack, and then you flash back to the boys' lives. And each time they flash back to the boys' lives, it sets up another reason to explain why they acted the way they did, how they got to be the men they were who could act in the way they did, how they learned the skills that got them to be able to act the way they did. One of the characters who tackles the terrorist, basically body checks him, slams him into the ground, played football for a while. So that explains why he was able to do what he did to the terrorist. So they're going back and forth between the past and the present, and every time they go back to the present, they move just one little notch forward in the attack, and then another little notch forward in the attack. And they explain how they got to that point. And one of the characters says at one point that they feel like their life is racing towards, and I'm misquoting this, and I apologize. They feel like their life is racing towards some critical moment, some critical event, and that everything they've done up until now has been preparing them or pushing them, leading them towards some life-changing event. And the movie is kind of set up to present the terrorist attack as if it were that event that his life was heading towards, and explain why, and explained everything that had been going on in his life since before he was in middle school, led him to be able to be the man he was to stop this potential massacre. The terrorist had an AK-47 or an AK-74. I think it's a 47, and he had 300 rounds of 7.62 ammo for it. 300 rounds. Some were loose, some were in clips. You can kill a lot of people who are unarmed civilians on a train if you have an AK-47 and 300 rounds. And they managed to stop it. So it's a good movie, and it's a compelling movie. The problem is the three men who are playing themselves are not actors. They can't act.
That's a shame. Clint Eastwood couldn't even save him from that.
I'm not saying it ruins the movie, but it's definitely, and it's more noticeable at times than others, and they're trying. There's just that hint of inauthenticity, of kind of wooden delivery, of a little bit of awkwardness, and I don't blame them. I mean, it's amazing that they're able to get their lines out in the first place. I mean, think about it. If someone took you and sat you down in front of a camera and you were on live to the whole world right now, 99.999% of people would just freeze. They wouldn't even be able to do anything. Stage fright would just paralyze them. It doesn't matter if they were, super tough Navy SEALs or a tiny little skinny kid. They'll just freeze up because it's nerve-wracking. It's a nerve-wracking experience. So the fact that they were able to do performances at all is kind of amazing. But it does distract from the movie to a moderate extent. If you can get past that, if you can get past the fact that these are terrible, they're not the worst performances I've ever seen. They're not overacting. They're not trying too hard. I've seen a lot of bad actors try too hard. They come off as just hysterical, awful.
So it's just normal. It's like watching a basketball player try and do a car commercial as opposed to, I don't know, Tommy Wiseau in the room.
Yes. It is not.
You think that's a terrible commercial, but he is just a basketball player. We don't expect him to act.
Yes, exactly. They do much better than Tommy Wiseau does. So it is a good movie in the sense that it presents some great and interesting. I wrote my article at Castalia House last week was about the need for movies and books and other things that present wholesome masculinity in a positive light to show why it's virtuous and necessary. And this is another movie, in addition to the two I mentioned in the article. And you can check out my Castalia House post. There's a link in the description of the video. It's another good movie about noble men who risk their lives, literally, to save other people. I mean, the guy who charges at him first, he actually pulls the trigger on the AK-47, and it misfires. That particular round doesn't go off, and that gives him just enough time to get to the bad guy. It wasn't a jam, it was a misfire. If he had got a chance to pull the trigger again, he would have shot him. And if that bullet had gone off, he would have shot him. So, people, if you believe God looks out for people, God was definitely looking out for him that day. When he tackles the terrorist pulls out a knife, nearly cuts his thumb off, and then proceeds to cut him around the face, back of the neck, top of the head. And then he has to get down on the ground and save a man's life by holding his carotid artery shut so the blood doesn't gush out until medical personnel can get there while he's got a thumb that's almost cut off. So,
well, no wonder they wanted to make a movie of it. That's downright heroic.
It is a great movie. With the themes of the movie are great. It presents an interesting story of these characters. It's done well. You need to put aside the fact that the performances are not going to be what you might otherwise expect from great Hollywood actors. It's just there. You just have to accept it. So that's 1517.
That is a terrible name.
It is a terrible name. Awful name. Now, the worst name they could have named it was Paris 317. Absolutely the worst name possible for that movie. And
I
sure,
heard 1517 to Paris and Clint Eastwood. I honestly God thought it was going to be a cowboy movie.
yeah. Well, they have what is it? The 3 something to
310
Yuma.
to Yuma.
310 to Yuma. Yeah. So, all right. Also, not a compelling name for a movie was Winchester.
Does it have to do with guns?
Sort of. It is a movie about the wife of the founder of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, the widow. He died. Her child died very, very young. And she owns over half of the company. So she has a lot of money, a lot of money. And she spends her money for 20 years, spends her money turning an 8-room house into a 100-room house. Building up rooms, building up additional rooms, building up staircases that go nowhere, hallways that go nowhere, or that wend around in a maze-like fashion, building all these rooms and then blocking the rooms off with wood, nailing them shut so nobody can get in, or after the rooms have been for a while, tearing it down. The movie, if 1517 to Paris is about brave soldiers fighting terrorists, then Winchester is about cowardly psychologists fighting ghosts. Supposedly, to this day, this is a real house. This is kind of sort of based on a real story. I don't know to what extent they fictionalized it. I imagine the answer is a lot. To this day, the Winchester house, which still exists in California, you can go tour it, is supposed to be the most haunted house in the country. There are more ghosts, supposedly, the legends go, in the Winchester house than anywhere else in the country, than any other structure in the country. So this doctor, this psychiatrist, is brought in by the lawyers and the board of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company because they want to get control of the company back from this crazy old woman that's wasting all her time and money building rooms, expanding this house, and then tearing the rooms down and building something else. They think that's nuts, and they want to take the company away from her. They are willing to pay the doctor $300,000 for a diagnosis or $600,000 for their diagnosis. If you can see the subtle difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the movie is him going to the house and staying in the house and trying to interview her and trying to interview her employees and trying to interview her daughter, and spooky things happening. It's a horror movie. I hope I'm not giving that away. It's a horror movie. And horror-y things happen. And I can't talk about the internals of the movie much without spoiling it for you. And this is one of those movies where the mystery is kind of a large part of it. I will say this. This is not the best horror movie I've ever seen. Now, people say that. This is not the best horror movie I've ever seen in kind of a sarcastic fashion. What they really mean is, oh, this is awful. This is terrible. I can't believe how awful and terrible this movie is. So I'm going to say it kind of sarcastically. No, I'm not using that in a sarcastic manner. This isn't one of the best horror movies I've ever seen, but it's still a pretty good horror movie. It's not super great, but it's still a good horror movie. If you like horror movies, you'll enjoy this one. Probably, I imagine. And what it made me think of is two things coming out of the movie. To step back from the movie. It's a horror movie. If you like horror movies, give it a shot. I enjoyed it. You will probably enjoy it too. If you don't like horror movies, then there's a good chance you won't enjoy the movie at all. It made me think two things about this horror movie that I want to I want to talk about that are kind of like deeper in depth than just reviewing this movie. One of which is the fundamental pattern of American horror movies. And the other one of which is the virtues of the jump scare. The movie is well done. The acting is great. The cinematography is great. The special effects are great, except for one scene. They didn't need to do what they did in the scene. There's a bunch of objects that are levitating, and the special effects look awful. They look fake. And so that was a mistake. They shouldn't have gone that direction. They didn't need all of those objects levitating. Just one in that scene would have been enough. So, I want to talk about the fundamental pattern of American horror movies. This does not hold, for example, for Japanese horror movies or German horror movies or French horror movies, Russian horror movies. Just American. And nearly every American horror movie follows this pattern. At least originally, we've been getting further and further away from it during the late 90s and this century. There is a great supernatural evil that is a mystery that is terrorizing and victimizing innocent people. There is a backstory to this evil, an origin story to this evil that you don't see in the movie, but you find out about as you go through the movie, as the characters who are being victimized or people they call upon to help them investigate the backstory. They discover the nature of the creature, what its strengths and weaknesses and capabilities are, and finally what it's vulnerable to. And when they discover that vulnerability, they can use it to defeat the horror. Killing it, dispelling it, whatever. So the horror makes sense. Virtually all American horror movies have an explanation that makes sense with what happened. In Nightmare on Elm Street, it was about this janitor who got burned and his spirit lives on to have revenge of the children of the parents who were responsible for his death. And that is the backstory to Freddy Krueger, and that plays out through the first movie. Sequels, by the way, tend to get away from this pattern. So this tends to only apply to the very first movie in a series. So Winchester, if you wanted to have a class study or a case study for a film class about how American horror movies work, Winchester could be one of the canonical examples. There is a creature, there is a backstory, you learn how the creature is operating according to the backstory. And there's actually 3 different backstories that play into it. The backstory of the wife and her house, the backstory of the creature itself, and the backstory of the doctor all come together in a really interesting way. And that's why it's a great case study, is it doesn't just take the model and apply it straight, it twists it, and it all fits together like a puzzle. So, if you're interested in horror, if you're interested in writing horror, I would definitely recommend, The Fog is another great example. And I was going to mention that earlier. Norm Anderson in the chat is asking, does that go for The Fog? As far as I remember, The Fog was the final movie that I had watched before realizing this pattern. The Fog, the John Carpenter movie called The Fog, not the remake, the John Carpenter one, was the final push for me to recognize this pattern. After I watched The Fog and I recognized what it had in common with other movies, horror movies I'd already seen, that's when I realized this is the pattern to American horror movies. And I keep saying that because Japanese horror movies don't have an explanation, generally speaking. They just happen. There is just something evil, and it just happens. There's no logic to it. You can't figure it out. It just is. And I'm not saying that's better or worse. That can make for very compelling horror, but it's not American horror. American horror has an explanation. So yeah, The Fog is a great movie, by the way. It's also a great case study for exactly what I'm talking about. This pattern is clearly there. Winchester plays with it, so it might be like your second case study is to look at how you can play with that model and how you can make things that fit together like a puzzle to go into this general template of the horror movie. So I very much enjoyed Winchester. Something that annoyed me during the movie, as I was talking with my brother-in-law about the movie, I realized that not only was I probably wrong about it, it annoyed me on an intellectual level, not on a visceral level. It wasn't a failure of the craft of the movie or the quality of the movie. It was something that I had learned to dislike, and so when it happened, it was effective, but I disliked it. And I'm talking about jump scares. Something happens, there's a loud sting of music or a loud sound, and you're startled and you jump, and then the movie goes on. Now, what's the general opinion on jump scares?
That they're cheap,
Yep,
lowbrow, sort of.
exactly. And here's the thing. That's why it annoyed me, is it does happen too much in this movie. At least during the first half, they do too many. The number 6 keeps coming to mind. They might have done 6 of them. It was around there. So here's my new thinking, though, after thinking about it when my brother-in-law said it. My brother-in-law mentioned something else, and it made me think about jump scares, how they operate in a movie. When you're watching a movie, generally speaking, you have a protagonist who is the character you are intended to sympathize with, and is the character who you follow through their journey you follow them through their journey through the plot of the movie. They are your entry into this world that the movie sets up. You're supposed to empathize with them. You're supposed to, and vicariously have your emotions prompted or prodded by what happens to this character. When this character hurts and is sad, we feel sad. When this character is in danger, we feel thrilled. Again, if the director's done his job. When this character succeeds, we feel happy. In The Karate Kid, right? Daniel Russo is the protagonist. He is the person who we follow through the movie. When Johnny beats him up, we feel bad for him. When he goes on a date with the pretty girl that he likes, we feel good for him. When he gets hurt in the karate tournament and his leg is so damaged, we feel really, really bad for him. He looks like he's about to fail. We're like, oh, that sucks. And then when he goes out and he wins, we feel great. That's the climax of the movie. We feel elated. That is the protagonist. Now, here's the thing about jump scares and why I think they're valid if used at the right time, if used for the right reasons, and not overdone, not just thrown in there thoughtlessly. If the movie is meant to take you along the journey of the protagonist and provoke emotions in you that mirror those of the protagonist. If the protagonist is nervous, we should feel nervous. If the protagonist is happy, we should feel happy. If the protagonist is startled, we should feel startled. And how do you do that? Jump scare. That's how you make the audience feel startled the same way the protagonist is. So, my opinion on jump scares has evolved just last night, because I think that is a perfectly valid way to bring the audience into the reality of the movie, into the reality of what the character is feeling, and that when used for the right reason, when used thoughtfully, not just thrown in for cheap thrills, but used in the movie to enhance the audience identification with the protagonist, when done well, I think a jump scare is absolutely worthy and useful technique, and that people who sneer at the jump scares don't understand why jump scares exist.
I can't add to that. That's a really good point. I've seen a number of movies where a jump scare is just a sort of a cheap ploy to get everybody to hop in their seats when it's not part of the interaction with the characters on screen. Meaning the interaction between the viewer and the characters on screen.
Yeah, and this movie, I think most of the times it does it, it actually is doing it right, doing it for the right reasons. Like the character turns around, there's something horrific there, and they're literally scared out of their mind. They're startled. Well, we're not going to be as scared out of our mind as the character is, but if you stick in a music sting, if you stick in something scary, then we're prompted to feel the feelings that that character is feeling at that time. So there was just too many of them for my taste. But I think they did it for the right reason to show you what that character is feeling, to bring them along with you. So, again, Winchester, I thought it was a good horror movie. It does not get as tense as as some of the great horror movies I've seen, but it's still a good horror movie, and of course, it's well done. All of it is technically well done, and the actors turn in really, really good performances. It has Helen Mirren in it, so it's quite enjoyable. She turns in a great performance as the widow of the Winchester. The story is satisfying. It makes sense. They don't cheat you. They don't lecture you. They don't shortchange the audience with, sometimes a lot of modern horror movies like to pull the rug out from under you. Like everything seems like it's okay and going one way, and all of a sudden they yank it out from under you and laugh as they kill off the character you like the most or whatever. This movie doesn't cheat you. It doesn't try to trick you in that sense. It does keep the mystery growing, and the climax is very, very tense. Because it involves two innocent characters who are on the verge of being killed horribly by what's going on, and another character having to use what he's discovered through the movie to try and save them. And I thought it was a tense scene. I thought it was a great scene. And it's not perfect. There's a lot of roughness to it. It could have been done a little bit better, and it definitely could have done with a better name, but it's still a good movie. Not a great horror movie, good horror movie. And I mean that as a compliment, not as, the modern day, oh man, anything less than awesome is horrible. No, it's a good horror movie. It's enjoyable. It's just not great.
That's great to hear. It's definitely more than I expected out of, if you know the business, February is where bad movies are sort of dumped. Because the audiences are smaller, so it's a good sign that that the movies that you've been watching lately are actually pretty good.
Speaking of which, speaking of movies that are dumped in February that might not be good.
Oh boy, we got a couple of doozies coming up, don't we?
We have next week is coming out the Black Panther, the brand new Marvel movie. Black Panther, you may not have heard this. You may not have noticed this on Twitter. Black Panther, the main character, is in point of fact black. In case you were wondering, in case you were curious, that is actually the truth. It's in theaters in 6 days, and the plan is that we're going to watch it next week and review it on the show next week. Talk about Black Panther. And maybe even talk about some of the things that have been said around Black Panther that are kind of ticks me off.
Yeah, why not? We'll talk about things that tick us off.
Um,
Probably even the movie, given the quality of the last couple of Marvel films.
yeah, it may be. I hope Black Panther is good. I really sincerely hope the movie is good. But if it is not good, I'm going to say so and explain why. So,
Well, I mean, his introduction in the Last Avengers, was pretty good. So
yeah.
at least the character and his little set of superpowers is a good start.
Avengers, or excuse me, Captain America: Civil War, the Black Panther was introduced, and I thought his character was great in that movie, and I liked that movie by and large, and I thought his character was great in it. So, um,
Could be good.
could be good. I hope it's good. If it's not, I'm going to say so. Honestly, um, that's definitely what next week's show. Unless some disaster happens and I'm not able to see the movie, or you're not able to see the movie, that's what next week's show will be about. What? Now you said there were a couple of coming up. What was another one that you were thinking of?
Oh, I thought isn't Solo coming out this year in the next month or two?
Solo
Or
comes
is
out,
my
I believe, in
timeline way off?
May.
Oh gosh.
Let me double check.
I know that
Solo.
we've seen some teaser trailers in the past couple of weeks, and it's not gonna be good, guys. That's the
Finally,
official Geek Gab preview. It's not gonna be good.
I would be willing to bet money this is not a. This will not be a good movie in theaters May 25th, 2018. Yes. So
Okay. All right. So we just got one. We got one big geek movie coming up.
and then the next Marvel movie, Infinity War, is right after that in May. So you get one in February, you get one in May. It's just it's too much. Too many superhero movies, too many quote unquote, geek movies. And too many of them are just it just seems like they're making them because they think they're going to be popular with the audiences. And maybe they are. Maybe they're, even with the failures like DC's failures, which are legendary, maybe they are still popular with audiences.
Who knows?
I'm just, they're getting worse and worse in my mind. And I'm not, I'm having a hard time getting really excited for Star Wars at all. The Last Jedi kind of burned me out on Star Wars. I'm kind of over it.
Yeah, you and most other people.
Um,
Star Wars is dead. I can't believe Disney killed it. Disney of all companies should have been able to do something with it. They killed it.
Yep. I don't see any. Well, I don't know. I mean, I thought these two movies weren't going to be very good. They were far better than I thought they would be. So I can't necessarily look at the, lower tier movies that are coming out. A Wrinkle in Time is going to be awful, absolutely awful, guarantee it. Tomb Raider's coming out in March in just about a month. There's the remake of the Death Wish with that's coming out in March. I hope that's good. I'm not so certain about it. They're just, yeah. Other than the few movies I've had the fortune of seeing, most of the things coming out don't look very good. So
nope. If you thought 2017 was bad, it's going to keep getting worse.
So, all right. Are there any final questions from the chat that we had to cover before we take off?
Chat's been quiet. They agree with your sentiment on Star Wars, though.
Awful. They burned it down. Okay, folks. Do you have any last words on anything before we take off?
Well, thanks for the great Gab, Daddy Warpig. Thanks for everybody for listening and hanging out and chat and talking with us live. Hope you all have a great weekend.
Yeah, ditto. Thanks everybody for tuning into the live show. We hope you enjoyed this show. We put well, I have to be honest. It isn't necessarily that we put in tons of hours in preparation for this show, but we do put in very intense preparation for this show. And we hope to get another episode of Geek Gab Game Night out sometime soon. You should go listen to the last one we did, though. It was absolutely great. It was about old school mechanics and why they worked, talking morale and reaction rolls and gold pieces, experience points for gold pieces. It was a great show. If you have any interest in role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, D&D, things like that, you ought to go listen to it. And if you're running a game that isn't old school, that's 5th edition or 3rd edition or whatever, strongly think about adding those rules to your game. Thanks for tuning in, folks. This has been Geek Gab. We're signing off. We are out of here. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.